Hello fellow freaks and geeks, and happy Halloween! Today on Criminology I'm going to be doing a wrap up of all the books I read in October. It turns out I went a bit mad and I've got 30 books to go through, so bear with me. So in line with the channel motto, I'm going to split this into 4 sections: crime, pulp, horror and that kind of thing. So first up, crime. First book, and this is in no particular order of when I read them in the month or of how good they are. The first book is The Third Beast by Peter Lochran, which is like an 80s revenge novel from the UK. I really enjoyed it in the end. I wasn't too sure about it at first, but it's quite an interesting take on the revenge genre. So it's about a guy whose niece is attacked and raped by a gang of teenagers, and he takes the law into his own hands and gets his revenge on them. What's interesting about it is he's the narrator, and you realise by the end of the book that he's quite self-deluded, so he kind of takes you on a ride as you go through the book, but by the end you realise that actually he's a bit crazy. So I thought it was quite an interesting read. There'll be a full review of that going up on the channel soon, and also on criminology.com, my blog. Next crime book was 5 Decembers by James Kestrel from Hard Case Crime, which was absolutely fantastic. So that's a book that comes out or came out in October, 26th of October I think. It's a fantastic kind of quite sprawling crime and war novel set in or starting in Hawaii in the run up to the attack on Pearl Harbor. So about a detective called Joe who is assigned a case of a kind of brutal murder, and how that investigation spirals into something much bigger. So fantastic hard-boiled prose, a great mix of kind of crime story, war story, romance. Just an absolutely brilliant novel. I absolutely loved it, and again probably will be filming a review of that one soon, and I've already written a review of it which will go up on the blog. Okay, so that's it for crime. Moving on now to pulp. So this is where I read most of the books this month, mostly because they tend to be very quick to read. So starting off then with books in the Mac Bolan Executioner series and the kind of spin-off series from that. So I read the first 3 Executioner books. So War Against the Mafia, which I've done a review for. Death Squad, the second one, which was just as good as the first. And then Battle Mask, and the third one, which was also excellent. So these books tell the story of Mac Bolan, who's a soldier who's come back from Vietnam, fighting a war against the mafia, who've killed his family basically. But just really fun, more crime oriented than I expected probably. The series, if you've seen my unboxing video I did of Mac Bolan books, you'll know the series goes on for hundreds and hundreds of entries and is still going today. But yeah, just really fun pulp crime, men's adventure type stuff. And then also read two of the books from the spin-off series. There are multiple spin-off series from the Executioner, but these are 2 that I'd read before in the past, the series anyway. So Able Team and Phoenix Force. So this is the first Phoenix Force book, Argentine Deadline, and Tech War, which is kind of midway through I think the Able Team series. So both quite fun, but lacking a bit in action, to be honest with you. So definitely not as much action as there is in the Executioner books, which quite surprised me, and just not as well written either. So they were okay, and I've got a few more to get through, but definitely not as good as the Executioner books. Moving on then to one of my favourite series I'm reading at the moment, the Edge books. So again, I've done a video on the Edge books. In fact, that was my first YouTube video. So this one, Bloody Summer, not as good as some of the other ones. I think I gave it 3 stars, but still an entertaining read. So these are really brutally violent westerns about a guy called Edge who definitely falls into the anti-hero camp, who's a bit of a bastard, to be honest with you, who's just out for himself. In this one, he's kind of gets involved in protecting a township that's kind of threatened by attacks by some Sioux warriors. So yeah, another fun read in the series, but you know, not one of the best. Another one then, so this is a reread for me. So the first book in the Phoenix series, Dark Messiah, and I'll definitely be doing a review on this one. So this is kind of a post-apocalyptic pulp men's adventure type book. absolutely crazy. So the level of violence and just absurdity that this book reaches is really quite something. So look out for the video of that, where I'm planning to read a few passages out from the book. It's an absolute hoot. Another continuing series that I'm reading, so the Gore series by John Norman, which are politically dodgy but quite good fun kind of pulp fantasy books. This one, bit of a lame cover. I think it looks a bit like the cover for a D&D module from the early 80s, but quite a fun read again. Definitely continues the kind of misogyny of the first book. So in this book, Tal Cabot, who's the hero, who's an Earthman who's been transported to this other world, Counter Earth. He discovers a city where the normal rules of the planet are reversed, and women rule the city rather than men. And of course, because women rule and women couldn't possibly rule in a John Norman book, everything goes horribly wrong for the city. So yeah, definitely politically very dubious, but quite a fun read nevertheless. And then moving on to 3 books from the Men's Adventure Library journal series. So I did a review of their book on animal attacks. I watched them eat me alive, which was great fun. So read 3 more of their entries. So this one, Cuba, Sugar, Sex and Slaughter, is a really interesting, I found it really interesting in that it's all stories from Men's Adventure magazines from kind of 50s, 60s, 70s that are set around Cuba. And what's interesting is that you know, and this wasn't something I appreciated, to be honest with you, that the American or the US take on Cuba changes over that time. So, you know, from initially the US being quite supportive of the revolution to it, you know, definitely being anti-Castro, and you see that whole range within this. So there's some articles in here, there's some really fun stories as well, lots of great kind of illustrations from the Pulp magazines too. So yeah, another very entertaining read from the Men's Adventure Library Journal. Also read the first of their new quarterly books. So this is something they've started doing this year. Rather than doing the themed ones, they're doing 1 book a quarter in a slightly larger size, which I think works better given that they're reprinting magazine content. So this one focuses on westerns. I didn't like it quite as much as the Cuba one, to be honest with you, but it's still a really entertaining read. Some great western stories in there, some interesting articles as well about kind of supposedly true things from the kind of Western era. Not sure exactly how true they were. And again, you know, some fantastic illustrations in here from the old Men's Adventure magazines. And then finally from them, this one, Barbarians on Bikes, which is a collection of mostly illustrations this time, so no real stories or articles, unfortunately, in this one, but tons of illustrations depicting kind of Hell's Angels and, you know, other such things from the Pulp magazines, with some interesting articles as well about, you know, the fear that was whipped up around the Hells Angels in America in the 60s and how that kind of fed into the whole kind of hippie counterculture and things like that. So a really interesting read. I was a bit disappointed there weren't any stories, but still very entertaining. And moving on to horror then. So got a couple of rereads here for me. So Ghoul by Michael Slade, which is the second in the Special X series. So a series about a group of Mounties in Canada who hunt serial killers, basically. This one actually largely set in London. Again, like with the first one, Headhunter, I didn't enjoy it quite as much on the second time round as I did when I first read it as a teenager, but it's still a lot of fun. The plot I found in both books is a little bit muddy, so I got a bit confused by what was going on at times, but when it kind of ramps up the horror, it's really, really good. And then also Vampire Junction, which I've done a video review for on here, which is a really good 80s vampire novel about a kind of teeny bopper pop star who's also a centuries-old vampire. So very entertaining read, packed with sex and violence, if you like that kind of thing. And definitely, I think Sonto is an underrated writer from the 80s. Moving on then to something a bit older, so The Case Against Satan by Ray Russell, which I read for the Plagued by Visions read-along. So this is a really excellent novel about an exorcism, and balances things beautifully between a kind of, is something supernatural really happening element, and against the kind of, is it just people's perception? So about two priests who try and exorcise a demon from a teenage girl, but you never really know right up until the end of the book whether something mysterious and supernatural is actually happening or if people are just behaving like it is. So fantastic, really good book. Can't believe I'd never heard of it before now, but thoroughly pleased that I read that one. Another, so more modern horror novel, so The Fisherman by John Langan, which is one that I'd seen referenced in loads of people's kind of top horror books, and I've done a full written review for this one, which will be going up on the blog soon. I really enjoyed this. So it's a tale of two fishing buddies who go to a kind of mysterious fishing hole, and on their way there get told a lengthy story about mysterious goings on in the past, at kind of turn of the century time when a dam was being built there. A really genuinely creepy book, beautifully written. My only reservation with it was it reads an awful lot like Stephen King, so I really felt like I felt like I was reading a Stephen King book, to be honest with you, but still a very entertaining book and definitely worth it if you like your horror a bit more kind of slow paced and literary. And then the final physical book on the horror side, Sinister Mix by Brian Bowyer. So I've done a video review on this one and a review for the blog as well. So this is a really excellent extreme horror short story collection. Some really nasty stuff in here, but very well written. And the short stories have a very interesting pace to them, which I found quite unusual and quite unsettling. So definitely recommended if you want to try some extreme horror. It's not as horrific as some of the things I've read recently in the extreme horror genre, one of which I'll get onto in a minute. But definitely very unsettling and I thought very well written. So moving on to the Kindle books I read in the horror genre this month. So first up, so another extreme horror one like Sinister Mix was The Slob by Aaron Beauregard, which, to be honest with you, I didn't like at all. So I've done a written review for this one rather than a video review. It's an extreme horror novel about a woman who sells door-to-door vacuum cleaners, who gets kind of abducted by one of the householders who she visits, who's an absolutely repellent character, who then proceeds to torture and sexually abuse her, basically. It's a very nasty book, and also not terribly well written, so the prose is really purple. The first third of the book, which is the build up to the attack, is probably the best third, which is all just really backstory about the woman. But once it moves into the kind of full extreme horror area, it just gets ridiculous. It's really over the top. It's quite unbelievable. And then the final third, where there's a big twist, which is, I thought was quite homophobic and also just not very good, just sealed the deal for me in making this a not very good book. So yeah, didn't really enjoy that one at all. Pseudo extreme horror book I read on my Kindle this month was Cuts by Richard Lehman. So I read loads of Lehman when I was a teenager and in my 20s and was interested in revisiting him. So I thought I'd try Cuts, as I had a copy of that on my Kindle already. Similar in some ways to The Slob. It's about a guy who goes on basically a rampage of murder and rape. And similar to The Slob, it's not very well written. It's also quite bizarre in that alongside this series of kind of gradually escalating attacks, you've also got another storyline, which is basically a comedy of manners about the faculty and students at a college, and how they're all having sex with each other, and the two storylines just don't really merge together very well. There are some overlaps, but I found it all a bit odd. But at the same time, it's quite readable. So Lehman, if you've read him, you'll know, has quite a readable style. The book moves incredibly quickly, and I kind of just wanted to keep on reading to see what he was going to do next. It's all a bit bonkers, but not. It's terrible, but kind of fun terrible, I guess. So next up on Kindle was The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward, which I read for the Ladies of Horror Fiction read along. And unlike most of the other people who read this book for that, I didn't enjoy it at all. So it's a book that very much relies on its twists, so I won't go into the plot too much, but I thought that the twists were quite obvious and that it just didn't really hang together terribly well as a book. As I say, loads of people seem to absolutely love it, but for me it was definitely a 2-star read. I didn't really enjoy it at all. Also read on Kindle a book I've been meaning to read for years, Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, which I thought was brilliant. So a very nicely written, I guess very rich with 50s Americana, and definitely felt like The Fisherman, felt like a Stephen King novel at times, albeit obviously it was written before Stephen King had published any novels. But yeah, an excellent novel about a creepy carnival and 2 teenage boys who are kind of swept up in it when it visits their town. So quite uplifting in the end, but very creepy along the way, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed. So finally then, on Kindle, I had a few books that I'd been sent to review. So the first one was Something More Than Night by Kim Newman, which has a great concept. So it's set in the 30s, and it's about Raymond Chandler, the author, and Boris Karloff, the actor, kind of teaming up to investigate a supernatural crime. It's a lot of fun, and I did enjoy it. There's some great writing in there. It's quite charming and amusing at times. The problem I had with it was there's a couple of lengthy chapters in there which are written in a completely different style to the rest of the book, and which I felt were unnecessary and really distracted me from the main story. They're related to the main story but separate from it. And for me, they spoiled the book a bit, and I think without them it probably would have been a 4-star read for me, but in the end it was a 3-star. Another Kindle read for me this month, and one that I've reviewed on the channel, was Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Core, which came out this month, which is a really creepy kind of supernatural novella about a group of people who are part of a wedding party who are staying in a really spooky Japanese mansion. So it had quite a slow build up, but the final third is properly terrifying. I thought I'm not often scared by books, but this one is genuinely creepy, so definitely recommended, and there's a video review on the channel. Also read The Gatherings by Jeremy Ray. I reviewed his book Petrified Women on the channel a while ago, which I really enjoyed. This one I didn't like quite so much, but it's still quite entertaining. So it's kind of a post-apocalyptic horror novella, fast-paced, got some really interesting ideas in it, but ultimately it wasn't as successful as Petrified Women, in my opinion anyway. And then the last one was a very strange British horror novella called Nana by someone called Mark Towers, who contacted me and sent it to me to read. This is a quite grotesque story about a young guy, a young boy, who goes to visit his grandmother in a nursing home, and it turns out that there's mysterious stuff going on in the nursing home, shall we say. The book gets more and more weird and grotesque as it goes. I did quite enjoy it for that, the utter absurdity of it at times. I felt that the kind of wrap up at the end wasn't as successful as it could have been, but it's still quite a fun read if you fancy reading something that's a bit out there. Finally on to And That Kind of Thing. So 4 books up here, 2 on Kindle and 2 physical ones. So the 2 Kindle ones, firstly up, Black Rum by D.L. Marshall. So this is a really entertaining thriller. It's the sequel to to Marshall's first book, Anthrax Island, about a character called John Tyler, who's kind of a security specialist. In this book, he's trying to kind of kidnap and extradite a far-right extremist from Europe and bring him back to the UK to face justice. And the book is kind of told half in terms of the run-up to that kidnapping, so how they're going to outsmart the guy's bodyguards and things like that, and then half about the journey home on this dilapidated old freighter crossing a rough sea to get back to England with enemies in hot pursuit. So Marshall writes really gripping, entertaining, kind of quite old school thrillers. So lots of action, but also lots of kind of environmental type action as well. So it's not just violence, there's kind of man against nature stuff in there as well. Another really solid read. I really liked Anthrax Island, and I really like this one as well. That's out beginning of December, so look out for that one, and I do recommend picking up Anthrax Island in the meantime if you haven't read that one so far. And then another Kindle read for me in a slightly similar vein, I guess, was Falling by TJ Newman, which I didn't enjoy at all. So this is a like airplane disaster type book about a tiger kidnapping where the pilot of an airplane, like a passenger plane with 140 people on it, gets on board, it's just about to take off, and then gets contacted by someone who says that he's kidnapped the guy's wife and family and is going to kill them if the guy doesn't agree to crash the plane. It just kind of gets a bit more, I thought it was an interesting setup, but it gets more and more ridiculous as the book goes on. And it's also full of what my wife calls American bullshit. So loads of kind of pro-American stuff. I thought it was quite racist in its handling of foreign characters. So anyone who's foreign kind of has to earn the trust of the main American characters. And it just didn't work for me at all. I thought it was quite mean-spirited, and I really didn't enjoy it much at all. So on to finally the two physical and that kind of stuff books I read. So first one, Master and Commander by Patrick O'Brien. So this is one that I've read before a few years ago. Fantastic kind of naval adventure, set, as you could probably tell, in the days of sailing ships. Really well written, fascinating amount of detail about old ships in there, but it never drags the story down. So yeah, if you fancy that kind of thing, a very entertaining read. And then finally, The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie by Jennifer Ashley. So this, as things stand, my kind of vlog I did about this is my most popular video so far, but a very entertaining Regency romance with a bit of mystery thrown in. Not the kind of thing I normally read at all, as you probably guessed if you watched anything else on the channel, but I thought it was a really fun read. Recommended to me by Crystal at Crystal's Bookish Life, whose channel is well worth checking out if you like romance. Yeah, I thought it was a really fun book. So that was my quite extended wrap up for October. I'm pleased to say that I managed to read all the books I had on my TBR for October, which I wasn't necessarily expecting to, and then some more, as you've seen. I think I might move to doing weekly roundups rather than monthly ones after this, because it was a bit of an effort to do 30 books in one video. But hopefully you found that interesting, and you've picked up a few recommendations along the way, if there are books here that you like the look of and haven't read. If you have read any of them, do let me know what you thought of them, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheerio.